It's Father Vogel. We continue our series on St. Francis de Sales' Introduction to the Devout Life. We are in part 3, looking at the different virtues, and these series of 4 chapters that we're in right now are looking at the virtue of recreation, that it's good for us to spend time in recreation. We, in the last chapter, looked at a kind of recreation that has some restrictions to it, that of games of chance. And again, he's going to look at another form of recreation that also will have some specific ways that it can be good but also bad. And that is the recreation of going to dances. Of course, when he speaks about it, dances at his time don't look exactly the way dances look at our time, so we remember that. But a lot of the things that he says still will hold true. He says, dances and balls are pastimes, neither morally good nor morally evil by their very nature. So dances can be good or bad. They're indifferent, but it's how we go about them that can make them good or bad. But the usual way of conducting these pastimes is very much inclined and disposed toward evil, and consequently full of danger and risk. So at his time, and I would say again in our own time, it's very easily for dances to bring in vice. So he explains, he says, those involved in dances keep awake till very late at night, after which they lose the mornings of the following days, thus losing the means of serving God in them. So that is probably true in a lot of the dances we have, going late into the night, and then the next day we may not be able to serve in the same way that we normally would. So that could be a way in which it's not the best thing for us. But then the next thing he says definitely shows that. He says that often those that are involved in certain kinds of dances can then lead to certain disgraceful and sinful incidents, such as, we would probably say even in our day, drunkenness, or also sexual sins. So he says that if you have to go to a ball or a dance, say like on the occasion of like a wedding reception, he says take care that your dance is properly prepared. So what does he mean by that? He says that we should dance with modesty, with dignity, and with good intention. So our intention has to be good in the way that we're dancing. Some people's intention to dancing might be to try to attract somebody and lure that person into certain activities, especially in the area of sexuality. That wouldn't be good. He says, dance little and rarely, because by doing otherwise, you run the risk of becoming attached to it. So just as he's talked about in other kinds of pastimes, recreation ought to be pleasurable, but we run the risk of becoming attached to it, and we want to do it more than is going to be good for us. And so he warns us the same way with dancing. And it's very true that we have to be careful exactly the way we go about dancing, what kinds of dances are going on, because there is definitely kinds of immodest dances that are part of our current culture. And our young people may learn it from peers as well as from watching TV videos online. And also we want to protect the purity of our children from the immodest dress or dance that could be part of some of those kinds of events. So it's these kinds of things that also occurred in St. Francis de Sales' day. And so he says balls, dances, and similar gatherings at night usually attract the vices and sins which are prevalent in a place, such as quarrels, envy, mockery, immodest lovemaking. And he kind of uses a description of how this kind of subtly can tempt someone into maybe some of these kinds of sin. He says it's breathes into their ears some lustful suggestion, some silly words of love, some flattering words, impure glances, amorous looks. Their hearts are easily seized and poisoned. In that kind of very emotional atmosphere, it's very easy to draw, especially young people, off into what they think is love, but in fact, it's probably just a kind of infatuation. So in this, and he's not the only saint who will do this. I remember when I was in the seminary, and one of our retreats, during our meals we were reading from Saint John Vianney, and we happened to go through a section in which he was being very, very strong against the kind of dances that were going on in his day. Kind of interesting, since as in the seminary we weren't going to a lot of dances anyway. But for those who find themselves with this attraction towards dance, especially the versions of dance that could lead us to some of these sins, he proposes the following reflections. So the first one is to think that while you were there at that ball, there were many that were suffering the pains and fires of hell for sins that were committed related to dances. Another reflection, he says, is that there were many devout and religious people that were spending their time much more wisely at this time in which we were wasting it frivolously at dance. That their time was spent with much greater eternal profit than yours. A third thought, if we are attached to dance, he says that while you were dancing, that there were thousands of men and women who were suffering pain, either in their beds, hospitals, or streets. Do you have compassion towards them? For there may be a day in which you yourself will be in the same case, where we're enduring especially pains towards the end of our life, while others are just dancing. Another reflection he says to think of is that our Lord, Our Lady, and all the angels and saints, that they saw the actions that you did at the ball, and to think in a proper way, what am I doing? Occupied with things that are nonsense. And then finally, his last one is that, alas, while you were there, time was passing by and death was approaching. Whenever we find ourselves attached to vices or sins, to think about, we only have so much time here on earth, and to think about what it is we're doing and turn back to God. Of course, in saying all this, he doesn't mean that every single time of dance is going to be bad. Like I mentioned, there are some occasions, like, for example, wedding receptions, where, it's going to be a requirement for us to be there. But to make sure, even at those events, that we're dancing and utilizing that form of recreation in the proper way, not trying to use another person or gain their attractions so that we can do certain things, but rather in a good and holy way. God bless.